So I was gonna do a video on kind of cancer and heart disease and health and fitness and all that kind of stuff. I just had a freaking killer that day. I can't even tell you. Um, at the point where I started to go into shock, just from the exhaustion. You start to your body temperature starts to drop off and you get real tired. It's definitely a good sign that you've trained too long. Um, I've gone into shock a bunch of times from exercise. It's not fun, but it's definitely one of those things where it's like, you're going to make some sort of gains. Um, Doing full body training is something that's going to leave you in a perpetual state of injury, in some regard. Um, but I think it's the only way to kind of cope with life that's healthy, um, that I've found. So instead of that, I'm gonna kind of just describe some of my routine, and I'd just like to say that like everything I do is intermittent. I don't think there's any type of training or any type of diet or any type of system, any system that is perfect indefinitely. We adapt what will give you the best, the best result one day, or the best result 1 month, or the best result 1 decade, is not gonna do so indefinitely. I think that's just true for anything. We have to constantly be adapting and struggling to learn what we don't even know we don't know in order to adapt. Because if we knew, we would have already adapted. And that's not just true to keep up with a real world or changing, you know, chemical and radiological soup that is life. But also like in all things, just improving your physiology to become stronger, to live longer, or to be more socially influential, whatever the survival mechanism is. The fact is, we gotta constantly be trying to challenge our system, in order to even tread water, right? So there's a decay of benefits as we adapt to the system, even if the system's working. And in doing so, we lose ground. Just it seems to be the way life works. So I do things to train my muscles. I do things um, dietarily and chemically to not just cope. I'm not just a vice-ridden machine. I do 99% of what I do um, chemically is to remove things that are negative. Very, very little of what I do is to enjoy myself. It's almost all to preserve life, and that's I feel represented pretty much in the economics and the time and everything. Basically, my one vice I would say is also my medical prescription, which is for medical marijuana. But I do consider it a vice. It's one of those things where it's kind of a necessary evil. Maybe not necessary, but the alternative is potentially violence. I'll be honest. It has a sedating effect on me, and for whatever reason. I don't take personal responsibility for the causes and conditions. I do take responsibility for preventing the violence, and I feel that, unfortunately, in lieu of justice, chemical intervention is required. That's, the truth. Or that's not necessarily my ideal life, but it is, of all the chemicals, the one that is, in my opinion, and not just my opinion, the least harmful to my long-term survival prospects, and also the most beneficial to preventing negative consequences. That being said, my use of marijuana is, the one thing I do, I would say, in my entire life that is not designed or engineered and blueprinted to make me stronger and more efficient in my endeavors. So there's a saying in Buddhism, it's like, he built a good wall, but look at those two bad bricks, those two crooked bricks. Those two bricks make it a terrible wall. And one of my favorite teachers in Buddhism is probably too good of a person for me to mention, but I would say, look at all those good bricks, not even give mind or give the attention to the ones that aren't perfect, but give all his attention to the ones that are perfect. And that's not necessarily a Western perspective, where we tend to dwell on our flaws. There's a healthy aspect to both perspectives. And I think it's important to be capable of both perspectives, to be introspective in an honest way. But the fact of the matter is, I do dedicate my life to self-improvement in almost all aspects of my life, and that's through financial investment, and the investment of my time and mind. Not perfect. I suffer, but what I put effort towards is generally in the areas of self-improvement. So the parts of the training that obviously I focus on, from like a Western perspective, is the muscle. As a man, it's not really typical for us to focus on the cartilage and the stretching, the fascia. I think that is so critical to your health that it's not even funny. I think if you seriously wanted to cure cancer, you would be looking at the extracellular matrix, as part of a standard checkup. I think the fact that, like, they don't do spinal taps with the presentation of neurological symptoms is malpractice. I mean, seriously, it's like, as a diagnostician of mechanical systems, if you told me, you had this problem, and I didn't do my due diligence to test it and to make sure that the source of the problem was X, Y, or Z, I wouldn't be a professional in my trade. But I think that, in Western medicine, It's largely eugenic and religious in nature, as opposed to like truly, you know, a refined trade. Because if somebody shows up with a headache and you're not looking at their spinal fluid, or if somebody shows up with hallucinations and you're not looking at their spinal fluid, what the fuck are you doing? You're just guessing, and I know the feeling, because now I've guessed and been wrong too, you know. But at least I know to do the test, and sometimes I don't have time, but I know to do the test. The other aspects of my life that I really focus on, besides stretching and my extracellular matrix, and I'll get into that a little bit. It's a portion of the stretching, really. Is bone strength, and I'm gonna post a video of a monk who is doing some very, very serious training, and I don't do that. I do something similar, and it's probably equally as strange looking. But the monk is doing is obviously traditional, and what I'm doing is just with the tools I have available, largely, but with a similar intention. And I think with what he does, it's more about pure fighting strength and in building of the chi energy, as opposed to necessarily conditioning the bones. But where my intention is to strengthen the bones. Yeah, to just be stronger, to have less potential to break, to have more potential to generate fresh blood cells, to stimulate the production of more stem cells. But the training technique is really simple. It really hurts. I know it doesn't look like it hurts, but it hurts a lot. You can definitely, I'm not going to say hurt yourself, but you could bruise yourself. And that is one. It's probably the more effective. And I think when it comes to actually like strengthening your bones, it's probably the better of the two. The second one would probably be more like stimulating long-term growth, and that has to do with the vibrating plates at 40 hertz and 33 hertz, and doing strength training while on a vibrating plate and at those specific frequencies. There's a couple of reasons for that, and that 40 hertz is unique because its ability to break down scar tissue throughout the body, and that can facilitate the regrowth of healthier non-scar tissue, which you're going to want to do. I mean, scar tissue isn't something you want long term. You want it there to stop the bleeding. You don't want it there for forever and ever. But it takes specific frequencies to kind of break it down over time, and 40 hertz is where it's at. So that's something that is part of the calculus. And then additionally, it attenuates the stem cells, and that causes them to differentiate inside the bone marrow, where they will react with the bone marrow and become bone marrow themselves, as opposed to leaching out into the bloodstream, where they will differentiate likely into fat cells. So the strengthening of the bones, I think, is an important part of maintaining long-term health. Um, I just want to stress one more time with the vibrating plates and strength training, and if you are also a tradesman in my trade as a HVAC tech, I would say that there's probably an increased risk, but that is for the settling of toxins, blood clots, dead fat cells, oil, oils laden with refrigerant, or for these chemicals and compounds to settle in your lower extremities as a consequence to chemical exposure in the workplace, but also potentially as a chemical consequence of training, because we are mobilizing potentially disproportionately more toxins when we are exercising than people who are sedentary. They're not moving, so they're not necessarily being exposed to new cells, new organs, new to them. In their relatively small, region of your body. So it's things to consider when training, is that there's going to be these like second order consequences that you need to account for. Things like going into shock. I live alone. I go into shock frequently as a result of training. Basically, I'll pass out. I'll get real cold and I'll get real sleepy. And it happens when I train too hard and I don't eat enough. And you got to be careful because it can kill you. And so can a stroke, so can pulmonary embolism or a heart attack. And when you're very strong and you're mobilizing fat and you're mobilizing oil, you are at a risk of suffering the consequences of gravity. So one thing I strongly recommend is, and I've learned this recently, is to elevate your feet. A good, like laying flat on your back basically, and keep your feet up off the ground. And think of it like oil, if you just raise, it's not water, if you raise your feet up for 5 minutes, if it was water, it would sloosh right out. But this is like, really low viscous oil. It's like molasses. It drips slowly because it's so toxic. But it gets down in your feet, and gravity is part of life. So I definitely suggest elevating your feet for like 2 or 3 hours at a time. Or maybe even heating your feet up a little bit while they're elevated if you're doing a lot of training, because you're going to disproportionately be mobilizing a lot of these oils. And these oils, the poison loves to get in the oil and just sit in the oil. Oil holds on to this stuff. So we got to be mindful of that. But yeah, so that's it. Just doing some training. I also wanted to say that, doing some back exercises, you can liberate your spinal cord, and it's very similar to elevating your feet. If you liberate your spinal cord, what I mean by that is cause increased separation in your discs, through use of a metal bar while laying flat on the ground. That is, just applying a very small amount of pressure, 5 to 30 pounds on the space between your discs with maybe a pipe depending on the arch of your back, enough to push the disc apart just slightly, without applying too much pressure. Or a larger balloon with the right concave that would make the similar effect on multiple discs at once, I think. You don't want to apply too much pressure or too much separation, because that's going to increase the risk of slippage. But if you were to just increase it just like a millimeter, you're going to notice a significant mobilization of oil from your spinal fluid into your lymphatic system. And I think that can be incredibly detoxifying. But that's, again, a second order risk you're going to need to manage with your liver, with your kidneys, and with settling oil into your extremities. Again, this stuff isn't just oil. It's not just fat. Fat and oil, sequester poison. That's what they do. It's like life is a poison wrapped in a lipid, wrapped in a poison, wrapped in a lipid, wrapped in a poison, wrapped in a lipid, all being oxidized with a little virus brain in the middle. So not really, but I mean, it's almost like that. I'm not saying that toxic fat is the origin of some second order life. But I'm saying that when you're mobilizing fat through extreme amounts of training, you can suffer these shock detox effects. You can have these organ failures. You can have protein or blood show up in your urine. I've had both. It can be scary. You're working out, you think you're doing the right thing. And next thing you know, you piss in a river of blood. You think you're going to die. You work and you pass out, It's scary sometimes. But it's not that it's wrong. It's just that you need to be mindful that if you're not strong enough yet, or if you're carrying a higher toxic burden, than maybe somebody who's been doing it their whole life or been experienced with mindfulness a lot longer, they might have less of a problem. But what I'm saying is that there's a bunch of things to this training, and it's sometimes very difficult to know what's right and what's healthy. It's about applying the appropriate amount of stress, I think. I'm not going to go too much into my opinions on long-term and short-term risks and rewards. I think a lot of it is trusting the right people at the right time, trusting your intuition. It's difficult to tell how much exercise or how much training of body systems is healthy, and how much is maybe part of the problem. Overtraining is a thing. People die from shock. People get strokes. People get heart attacks at the gym. But I don't want to go into that or stress it too much. I just think that I need to take a rest, and that the right thing to do is to focus on different parts of the system at different parts in your life, and to not just train the muscle, to not just stretch, and to not just train the bones, but to cycle between the different approaches and to experiment with different techniques, and to never settle ever on this is my technique or this is my style, because it has to constantly be challenging itself. It just has to. It's just what it is. So that's it. Later.